on a digital world town hall meeting and a normal ripple effect. We're grateful for you taking the time, getting a general update, and then being able to ask questions for those that are logged in. If you want to log in live, you're welcome to do so at either townhall.clear.events or rippleeffect.clear.events. Either one of those are ecosystems where you can actually ask live questions. This meeting normally goes 60 minutes. If there's question and answer, full question and answer in the last 30 minutes or so. We're grateful for those that are here and helping. Terrence out of Australia, as well as Wally out of the US, and as well as Elle out of the US. Thank you for helping to answer any support related questions if they do raise. Questions can come from either chat or from voice-based dialogue. This is a private membership association. There are forward-looking statements that we may discuss as it relates to really decentralizing a alternative to the existing system that's basically being pushed on humanity, which I'm sure some of you are aware. If you're not, this is an opportunity for us to discuss it. We're basically connecting in decentralized phones and an architecture for decentralized phones into decentralized storage and then connecting it to humanity. It's a real simple adoption process, but it may be confusing for folks if they're just hearing about it or haven't used these types of systems. We're also going to talk about times that we're spending focusing in on going to market, whether it's telling people through word of mouth, like with Career United, people telling people, or if it's working through strategic partners or countries. And primarily, today we're going to talk a lot about connecting in the Middle East. And I'll pull up a quick slide that kind of talks about it. But connecting in the Middle East with the Pacific. And so there's a lot of importance that we're focusing in on that particular topic, and that's what we're currently on a journey to do. So we're physically not in normal offices today, so I appreciate your ability to hear through some of the noise that's around. But today we're focusing in on the Middle East and the Pacific. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the results there, or at least environments there that are going live there. One of the biggest things that we're at least seeing today is the ability to bring up what's known as the first digital nation in the world, namely Tuvalu. And Tuvalu has the ability to literally take 11,000 citizens on an island similar to what you see here, that with rising sea level water, the actual supposed global warming that is increasing the level of water that is all throughout the world from melting icebergs and others, basically creates salt water that comes up on, or seawater that comes up onto the land and makes it inhabitable. I personally have been to this part of the world. It's actually, Tuvalu is made up of about 1 million square kilometers of ocean, and there's a main part of what they would call a lagoon that kind of goes in a circumference. It's like an atoll, but a very large one. So at the top, it's about 12 miles by 10 miles in circumference. And just a real, it's really the middle of the Pacific. It's very neutral. The people are wonderful. A lot of them have roots from other parts, such as Tonga and Samoa. Their hearts are absolutely good. There's some interesting things, at least for me, that I'm learning and growing. But they've been one of the first to select and stand up and say, "Hey, we want to be the first digital nation." So following along with what we talked about here, and I don't know if you really understood this, but this go-to-market strategy where we work directly with key governments, this is really one of those first key governments. So Tuvalu being the first digital nation, you actually see over probably the next 3 to 4 days, some additional videos. Right now, you can see a couple different videos. So there's one with Minister Simon Kofi. So if you haven't seen what he looks like, we may not be able to hear him. This is basically who he is, and I would absolutely lock arms with him and stand with him for what is right. And I believe that he's one of the politicians in the world that's willing to deal with the political realities, and he's willing to walk in those circles to be able to do what is right. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to build with him, but you'll also find some additional explainer videos, and there's going to be 4 total that will actually be live again within the next 3 to 4 days, particularly around the different services that are being stood up. And this is an ecosystem that will go hand in glove with the digital world, but it'll also be its own. It'll literally have its own land management system, its own dispute resolution system, its own currencies. It will have its own ability to be able to issue its own digital assets. Whether those things are digital IDs, maybe it's a driver's license, maybe it's an international permit, maybe it's a marriage license, maybe it's some type of registration, or maybe it's a corporation or a digital asset that can tie to that. So um, this is actually the first one that is being stood up, and we're currently in the process of doing so. And it actually functions. So when you go and log in, like if I were to say I want to actually log in, now you don't necessarily have to have a Clear phone or a Freedom phone or an Armor phone. You can literally log in with a digital life app, whether that's Samsung Life, Fiji Life, Tuvalu Life. But we recommend anybody that's within this ecosystem for Tuvalu to actually use Tuvalu Life. But I'm gonna go ahead and just use my own Life app here. I'm gonna go ahead and say click. Should pull up a QR code. Oops, what did I just do? Like it's dropping down. I wonder, Wally, if you could put a message. I don't know what time. It's a terrible time. It's been nice for those guys. Well, no, 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 no. I'm in a different time zone. Um, I want to actually show folks how this works because it's a unique system that's in parallel to the digital world, but it's not the digital world. So they actually have their own systems, databases, and structure that actually ties into the decentralized architecture that is the digital world. So it ties into the digital world, but it's not. It's its own ecosystem. So um, what I'll do is I will just actually, Wally, would you check with the Gaz or Tyler and just make sure that this URL, so it's going to be digitaltovallo.tv/digital-login, is actually functioning correctly before I go through it any further. And maybe it's this browser. Let me try a different browser. Yeah, that's what it was. So that browser is a pretty locked down browser. It's ClearWeb for those that haven't used it before. So I just pulled up a different browser. So Wally, no need to follow up on that, but so it's actually logged me in here. So this is the back end ecosystem for this new country that's a digital nation in the digital world that basically has, you can see that this particular archetype or interface doesn't have a company. So I can create a new company, I can join a council, I can raise a dispute, I can have a vote. There's marriage elements that tie to it, there's driver's licenses, agreements. So there's different parts and pieces that have basically been stood up as just a basic element. So this is one of the ones that people may have not seen before, which is an international type of a driver's license that's tied to a cryptography code. So um, their whole system will basically move from the existing process that they're currently using into this type of a process. And you can actually take a test. Let's see if I can do this real quick with you. I don't know what I actually. No, we'll go ahead and do it. Just find the file real fast. I can upload it. Okay, finally, there we go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to pop this off real fast. Uh, and for those that are not aware, the way that the cryptography works is I'm going to actually click on this button here, and I'm going to use the same application that I logged in with to actually validate my identity. And that's actually what is locking down the derived key that ties to it. Let me say okay. Go ahead and apply. I'm doing wrong. I'm filling out the form wrong. I don't want to take a lot of your time, and I want to figure out what's. I'll run through this a couple times, but this is a new ecosystem where the driver's license will actually physically come from this jurisdiction. So let me figure out some of these other issues and errors, and I don't know what I did wrong, but I don't want to take any more of your time on it. But that is a big part of this new digital ecosystem within Tuvalu that will basically allow people to actually start getting on their way to a new type of digital services within a ecosystem. So we'll have more to come here as we mature and go on. There's other things that are happening within within Saudi Arabia, within the Middle East, that is basically helping. And for those that are not aware, I'm going to go ahead and say Saudi boat. Something simple as this. So if you haven't seen this new vehicle, I shouldn't call it a vehicle because it's not a vehicle. Um, I won't actually pull up some of the other. You can kind of see as it's docked, you can see a certain element of, you know. So this is an old story on it. This actually, this actually came up. It's gone from 5 billion to 8 billion in dollar amount. And so for those that can't see, it's moving from a process of being a concept. Boy, I clicked on the wrong one. Let's see if we can go ahead and play this real fast. May not be able to hear it, but in effect, connecting in 60,000 people that live in a community that actually float around the world. So it's not just living a life that is physically on land, maybe within a certain city or within a certain jurisdiction, but it's actually kind of moving around. And it's actually going to be driven 100% by a digital system. So how you own, I'm going to turn this down. So how you actually own the property, how you actually get on, off, your identity for it, how you pay for it, how you communicate with it. It will all be within this new digital decentralized architecture and world. And the goal is to connect up this type of a system or community or ecosystem with the rest of the world, and to do so in such a way where you literally have humanity that is living a life that is in a digital ecosystem, but it's also based upon citizens of the world. So it's not just citizens of one country that sits within certain country borders. Because think about it, we've got 11,000 people within Tuvalu, and they're predicting within the next at least 100 years, so 2050, they're already starting to see where people are being forced to actually move from this land. Now, they have purchased land into other parts of the countries, and other countries have been very good to work with them on it. But, in all reality, they're losing their home. They're losing where generations have come. And there's also, it's not just a matter of where do they go as far as a location, but how is their language preserved? How is their identity preserved? How is it that they can actually operate within a new ecosystem? And a lot of this, not particularly this ship, but imagine a relationship within the ecosystem of where this gets created to be able to tie them all together. And that's really what, a large portion of this connecting up. So you've got, this is actually being built in a port that is being built. So the port itself, the actual, they built literally a ecosystem that can build the ship. So it's not just a matter of going to a shipyard and building a ship. They had to build a shipyard particularly to actually build the ship. And then it can set sail. And it's not just a matter of staying in the Red Sea or within the Indian Ocean, but actually connecting into other parts of the world and creating waypoints. And it also creates an opportunity to be able to align cultures, especially indigenous cultures, where they may have had different experiences of growing, but a lot of them, especially like the Bedouins within the Middle East, they have similar consistencies of how other other tribes and cultures have actually grown up. Maybe how, and really when you look at this, how decentralization within these different tribes and cultures gave different local chiefs the ability to serve the people. In some ways, yeah, it may have been oppressive and it wasn't serving, but in other ways, you see basically a similarity. You also see it with some religions as well, and I'm not saying that there's necessarily a direct correlation. We'll just kind of leave that for where it is, but you'll see that decentralization, where tools and authority is actually, or even keys, are actually disseminated to the local environment to be able to have services delivered to them locally. So, really, a big portion of what we're talking about is having a governance system that can actually be driven down to the actual users within the environment of what they're actually operating in. But what we're talking about with this, where you've got, this element that floats around the world, so to speak, it opens that up to, well, how does this actually get managed and governed? And when people start seeing that, I think you'll see a solid alternative to the existing centralized system that is currently being deployed and will be mandated for humanity. And time will tell a lot more about how that actually comes to be realized. So, working a lot on that, particularly with Tuvalu, particularly with Saudi and the Middle East. And it doesn't just talk about how, identity or corporations or assets or driver's licenses or maybe even um, assets within organizations get created, but it goes on to actually talk about how systems can actually provide value exchange and how governments can actually provide services through service providers to new ecosystems. So we'll leave it at that, but wanted to make sure that at least anybody that may be new to this conversation may understand some of the baselines. So we'll go ahead and take some time now. Actually, 6 minutes off schedule. I guess we started a little bit late, but we've got the next 24 minutes open for questions, thoughts. Actually, 23 minutes open for thoughts, comments, feedback, or just maybe even an observation around what you're seeing within the last week within your part of the world. So again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them now. There are a couple different channels. So again, townhall.clear.events or rippleeffect.clear.events are two ecosystems that you're welcome to ask those questions. So I'll go ahead and be quiet now and let anyone raise their hand. or go off mute and go ahead and ask a question if you're in one of those ecosystems. Hi, James. So it's a combination of the governments themselves actually saying this is the direction we want to go in. For instance, like Tuvalu, for this system here, the country itself actually funded it. Um, for conversations with, it wouldn't be appropriate, not in this forum, and probably not even. I'd have to get some approval. And the reality is there's a calculation based upon population that then ties to what does it cost to stand up an actual system, and it's not just standing up the system. It's really how do you market it and get the adoption within the actual communities or country or ecosystem. So there's a marketing budget that will tie to each one of these, and that's one of the core things. It's an interesting question because that even today was on the priority around creating a spreadsheet based upon population, based upon each country's population, and requesting a budget for particular funders to be able to facilitate it. So you're wise. That's a very wise question, and I really do wish I could say, hey, it's this organization, and it's this dollar amount. But right now, we can't go through that. We shouldn't go through that. So, but good. Yeah, yeah. Super question though. Yeah. So, but it is definitely something that is currently being focused on. Other thoughts, comments? Hey. You know, one, I think by you just continuing to learn and desiring to be a part of the solution is one of the ways. I can tell you that by us actually standing up and using the new systems, whether it's on the technology side or whether it's on the actual process side. For instance, you're in Canada, if I remember right. Canada is a Commonwealth country, and a lot of Commonwealth countries are the initial test beds for compliance and regulations that are being rolled out, namely Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These are all countries where you will find a very rigid approach to governance. And they're really testing. They're testing whether who's going to push back, how's it going to be pushed back, when it gets pushed back on. Because once it's proven, whenever you've got like new products or tests or other ecosystem, it's proven that if you go into these test markets, roll them out, it's something that can actually also be rolled out to the whole world, or at least majority of the world. And so what you're seeing are things like, for instance, let's say that you wanted to travel from Canada to a different jurisdiction. You'll start seeing things get locked down, whether it's air travel, boat travel, or even vehicle travel at the different waypoints of physical transport. And when you understand common law, or law of the land, law of the sea, as well as some of the things that we're currently basically traversing through, you're going to see things get very rigid. And it's not that you have to disagree to a point where um, you put yourself in a target, but there are things that you can do to be able to embrace in this new system and to start using it. So the more people use it, the more adoption there'll be, the more interaction, the more people can tell other people. For instance, I personally will not actually renew a U.S. passport. So I travel on a passport that is actually a part of a new ecosystem that is actually a part, and I won't be specific for this particular one, but it's a digital world ecosystem that's 100% digital. And you'll see that there's countries, so that there, and there, even though this is not in the same database within some of these other countries, there's still capabilities to travel or even travel through or to those ecosystems. Now, it, yeah. Well, right now, really no one will accept them. But the key is the more we start using them and pushing against the norm and just not saying, not it's not you just can't go and say, okay, well, we just go ahead and welcome in this new financial system. We welcome in the new controls. We welcome in the new limiters. Oh, you didn't want us to, if we don't think that certain way. An analogy was brought up over breakfast this morning, where if someone actually drinks alcohol and gets a DUI, the next time they go and try and buy alcohol, they won't be able to buy alcohol. Now, some of us in our right mind would say, well, that sounds about right. That's a good check and balance. But the real reality of what that type of thing puts into place is actually it takes away choice, it takes away, and I'm not somebody that drinks alcohol myself, but that's an analogy of what can happen when you connect up a behavior with the ability to control not just the financial system, but the actual systems of purchase and also the creation of product to sell. So um, I guess the point is you are already doing such a huge role just by checking in and believing that there's got to be a better way. And I would argue that the more we all understand that there is an alternative, the more we can actually continue to test it, use it, adopt it, be patient with it. And there may be something where people say, hey, I want to actually help develop a piece of it, or I want, and that's the gorgeous part of this is people can actually contribute and start developing in and on their own cognizance or design, so to speak. So, um, well, the digital world is actually live, um, and we really just have to start using it. So, if you created a company and then you actually went to the current fiat systems and you said, hey, I've got a company in the digital world. It takes this currency, and I want to create a bank account to be able to combat with that. The goal would be, and I'll see if I can. I don't think this will have. Eh? Yeah, 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 exactly. So you can actually go create a business, and let's say that let's say that this was your dog treat company. Okay, So you would have you don't have to have a physical location, but you would definitely have a digital location, so a URL or online. You would have a digital world identity, and this isn't fictitious, this is real today. You have the ability to actually have members of it, a reputation score, a manager, maybe a digital asset. As you send those digital assets around, it'll actually show balances. It'll have different things that normal corporations do based upon whether it's a state, a province, a country. Uh, you know, Sometimes they do it based upon smaller settings, such as a town or a city. But you'd basically have an entity. So let's say that this was, Dog Cookies Group, and you wanted to go in and you wanted to actually create a bank account. Well, you could go in and you could provide them with this type of a document here, with this type of a link here, and you would name yourself. You basically are figuring out how to connect in the physical world into a digital world asset. So if you create a business today, you could go and create a bank account. Usually they're going to look for some type of a taxpayer identification link, which you can actually also create those and link those within this same system. So in the United States of America, you can get what's equivalent as employer identification number that you can actually link into this, and so there's a taxing link to it as well. So you could go create a bank account and actually start operating that business. So just like you would do in a certain, like let's say you've created a business in the US, people like to use Delaware because that's shareholder centric. If you want to raise money, that's where you do it. If you don't want disclosures, there's other states, I won't be specific, but you basically incorporate based upon a friendly ecosystem within those worlds. And one of the things that I was trying to show you here is you start seeing once you start lighting up whatever kind of business, let's say it's a decentralized autonomous organization. In the US, there's only, what is it, Wyoming? There should be a Wyoming. So there's a Wyoming capability that can link to it. And so you could actually incorporate in Wyoming. You could also incorporate in the digital world all at the same time and link them all together and have a page just kind of like what this is. So you'd have, your foreign entity number, you'd have your taxpayer identification number, you would have, but it's all wrapped into a digital world ecosystem. So the answer to your question is let's stop talking about it and let's actually start using it. So let's start creating businesses that are in the digital world. Let's start taking those businesses through and actually getting them copyrights, getting them trademarks, getting them bank accounts. You have to actually go into your banks and say, hey, can I set this up? And maybe one time out of three, you're going to say, people will say, yeah, we'll let you do that. But two times out of three, they'll say, you know what? I don't know what that is. We're not comfortable doing that. So those are the types of things that I would highly recommend. I've personally done those things. It's just kind of like what happened when one of the first digital marriages actually was happening in Utah County. The Utah County Commissioner actually went into a bank and said, I want to open up a bank account, and this is my new name based upon my new marriage certificate. And they're like, well, we don't know what this is. They're like, well, call the county commissioner, call the county clerk, call the county attorney. Go ahead and validate it. And so they validated it. They got the bank account opened. Or, another good example is even like you're up in Canada. I don't know what province you're in, but I know in the Ontario province, if you want to get married, you actually have to get vaccinated. And to get, you, say again? Yeah, yeah. So we had a lot of people from Ontario that came and said, hey, we just want to get married online then. We don't want to get vaccinated, but we do want to be married. And so they'll pay their $149. They'll have somebody set up a time. They'll have an online meeting, kind of like we're having here. And the next thing you know, they get a marriage certificate, kind of like this incorporation certificate, right? And so from there, they can start operating. I can tell you that other jurisdictions, like in Israel, the country really didn't like it, primarily because a couple of the marriages that they were doing were actually not in accordance with the morals and perspectives and virtues of that country. For instance, let's say same-sex marriage. You can do those in Utah County, and so in Israel they're like, no, we don't authorize that. We don't want that. but they would have these couples, over 1,000. So we've done, I want to say, over 35,000 marriages within the last 3 years, and there was about 1,000 individuals. So that's about 500 marriages that, give or take some, that Israel actually created a lawsuit, full-on lawsuit, to either discredit or validate that these marriages were actually valid. So they went through the process. It took about a year and a half, and they went through the process, and they actually, on their own internal merit and review, in their own judicial system, they they announced a win in the favor of the online, Utah County marriages. So their own courts found it valid. And it's not that it really is. It really is. It creates a precedent that's just amazing, like something we haven't seen before. But that would have never happened if we didn't see COVID, if we didn't see some of these other things that started transpiring. And so, the key is, how can we operate in a digital world? For instance, all of us on this call right now, whether you're listening to this as a replay in the future or whether you're actually live asking questions, how do we actually come together? Is the conversation being recorded or voice type dictation and stored for some other negative, nefarious type reasons? Or should you own the data? And some people think, you know what, I don't care about a conversation with a particular online meeting, or I don't care about a conversation with me and Susie or my grandma, but I'm telling you, everything that you create is a type of data exhaust. Where you go, what you do, what you listen to, how you do it creates an element where it's valuable and it can actually prove who you are. And it's actually very important data, especially when we start talking about things around maybe health or maybe identity. If someone's had their identity stolen, they really understand the importance of that type of a process. So, for instance, even in this conversation today, I've disclosed just from screen share massive amounts of information, right? And so, what happens within that? Is that actually something that can be taken? And really, what we're doing is we're building the next generation system that uses cryptography. Really, what the biggest difference is, this little line right here. So this is a public key that uses key rotation and key management behind it with derived keys for the future of identity. Some people may say that makes no sense to me at all. But what I'm telling you is this technology has been proven. I think that what happened with Bitcoin in the last 13 years is valuable, but I don't think it's this massive global change that a lot of folks think it's actually about, or maybe the trillions of dollars that have been pushed into the ecosystem within the cryptography world. That's another thing that's kind of transpired over this last week is cryptography, which is or crypto, which is another conversation. But the point being is understanding how math and security can truly be disseminated. So, for instance, Bitcoin is a very good litmus test that the math and security behind the cryptography actually works. It's not been violated. It's not been broken. I'm not saying that it can't be in the future. What I'm saying is with the computing capabilities today and the methodologies today, it's still standing very firm and strong. Um, and what we're basically doing within the digital world is intelligently deploying those types of key management systems to the individual. And that's the biggest difference. The individuals actually have to say, hey, you know what? I'll buy in and I'll start a business within the digital world. And I'll go ahead and try and interface with in the existing world. So maybe I'm in Australia. Maybe I'm in Taipei. Maybe I'm in, Egypt, and I actually want to create a business and I want to open a bank account. For instance, in one of the countries that I'm very close to currently, it takes about 2 weeks just to open a bank account, whereas in the United States of America, you do it within 2 hours. So, you know, and I've actually used the same process within both those jurisdictions. It still takes the same amount of time. You have to do certain things, and there's also experiences that you're going to have that may be negative, and we need to learn those. We need to be able to understand them. We need to be able to build systems that are in compliance with the existing systems that are there, but at the same time be able to afford folks the ability to be free and to obfuscate their identity if they so choose. But yeah, so does that answer your question? I know in a long way. Yeah. 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 Yep. No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And that same level of concern is what they're doing behind the scenes. They're actually, by the way, I'll bet you that company is from the same part of the world that I'm from. Um, but they're actually underwriting you. They're checking credit worthiness, and they're gonna charge you a monthly fee and a commitment to stay within that monthly fee for a period of time. You're gonna pay a nominal upfront, so your barrier to adoption is very low. But they're actually going to use who you are, your name, your identity, to validate credit to extend to you, and then they sell and discount the payment stream to get paid for the gear up front. So you got a financing vehicle that's making money based upon your identity. You have a manufacturer that's making money. You have a sales and marketing association that's telling you about it. So you don't realize as a customer that there's all these things going on behind the picture, but I'm telling you that this is very real. It's very valid, and it ties to really credit, and that's another big part of what we've been building out. I don't know that we've gone through this. I think we may have talked about it. Pull open some of these. Yeah, and we're still. No, you're exactly right. We're still in the early days of it as well. So what we're talking about is cryptography, or what Bitcoin actually brought out, where you've got public-private key pair. Not necessarily how the mining and all that other stuff works, but the ability for that to actually come out and get deployed. You had a whole ecosystem that I believe was built on speculation and gambling, and you're starting to see some of the different. For instance, in this part of the world, the Security and Exchange Commission has come out within the last week and actually said that there's certain technologies. So the ones that are listed here, which I won't specifically name, um, 12 different crypto assets are actually defined as a security. And so you're seeing some things getting stronger, some things getting weaker. I don't know if you remember 6 months ago, that's one of the reasons why what we're doing with this adoption process. So where we're actually focusing within governments. So central bank digital currencies, if they're decentralized, could actually be good. If they're centralized, it's not good. The key around that is who owns the keys, right? And so it's not a matter of speculation and gambling. It's a matter of getting these governments the right systems and tools to be able to truly stand up on their own and to self govern themselves. and that's why we're focusing in within governments. We're not a part of the speculation within these different assets. We haven't been involved with big exchanges. We haven't been involved with big liquidity pools. We've basically built a group of clear companies that are focused on building decentralized systems. Let's see, we're losing some folks. Um, oh, they're there. So, anyways, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this was something that we talked about 6 months ago. It's starting to happen, and the goal is to be able to be in a very mature place, especially when it talks to how these types of systems, different parts of the world, how it gets adopted, how it gets rolled out, and that's currently what we're working on. So we're halfway into this year, literally second week of the 6 month, and I'm very happy with the progress. I had somebody ask me this morning, do you see a lot of distractions? And I would say, yeah, there's a lot of distractions. I won't go through some of them, but at the same, on the, go ahead. Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of that stuff just is. I'm amazed that there's not been more um, by design issues currently. But I can say, within the first 6 months of this year, to be able to meet with 16 countries and to be able to get a chunk of those on board, to be able to stand up some of the systems within them, even though the adoption process really hasn't started yet, but to be able to at least get those things done, very happy. Very happy with the ability to bridge that gap, between the Middle East and the Pacific. And I really believe that this can be a counterbalance to the existing centralized systems that are there. And I think we've done a good job of working with certain associations to be able to also drive awareness within these different centralized systems that there is a better way. And they don't just have to deploy based upon the user not owning their own identity and data. So I hope this update has been good. If there's any further questions, now's the time. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and wrap this meeting up and we'll see you next week. Go ahead. Uh-huh. Yeah. Your question is phenomenal. And it's actually something that we have worked on. I'm going to go through a couple different scenarios. And I can tell you inside of, and this is one of the things I was going to show you earlier, but what I'll do, give me a second here because I want to actually show this to you. The real key is the ability, and I even believe, let me see if I can go back out. I don't know if you're in America or not, but in America, okay, in America, especially as you and I were being brought up, they would talk about the American dream. Do you remember what the American dream was or is? Yeah, there you go. So the American dream was the ability to be able to buy the home. And I would actually be a little bit more specific. The American dream is actually the ability to get credit. And what I mean specifically by that is the ability to actually get a mortgage. And what they do is they basically, it's kind of like what we were talking about before, where Danielle is saying, I don't want to give my date of birth out to some punk kid that's selling me a security system so I can feel safe. It goes against really the everything that I believe as an individual. And but in effect, she's actually giving up her date of birth to get underwritten by a credit system to then get a security system. It's the same thing that happens in the mortgage world. But the process for the actual mortgage company, for instance, mortgage companies really love the ability to say, hey, we want to cryptographically prove that the house is in a title. So When the title process starts, well, this isn't working. Trying to pull up a screen for you here real fast. I'm gonna start over. But imagine if someone could search online to find a property, and then once they find that property, they could actually get financing for that property approved. And all they had to do was allow a username and password to log into their bank. And so what happened there is it automatically uses an application that not just logs into the bank, but it actually goes into the bank and it scrapes. It scrapes how long has your account been open? What is the average transaction size that you have? What does negative daily balances look like? Why can't I open this thing? There we go. What does, let's see, this was it. What does your mortgage payments look like? So it can actually identify payments. So it knows, hey, this is a payment to a mortgage company. How many mortgages do you have? Or at least that you're actually paying for within this organization. Um, it can go through and see a lot of different data. And then what they're doing is they're actually approving, and this isn't in the future, this has already happened. So if let's say you got a recent mortgage and it was with like an organization called Rocket Mortgage, okay? Which is, they've actually done $4 trillion of mortgages just in the last year. They use the same technology, and the organizations behind this technology, trying to find, really important. Man, it would be nice if they shared this stuff. I don't have access to it. But imagine if credit was built into this new digital ecosystem. So, for instance, you could actually log into your bank account, but it didn't link to you. So the data that was scraped didn't link directly to you, but you could actually start going through the credit process and get a mortgage or purchase a car or maybe get a line of credit. But it's all based upon data that proves who you are. Maybe it's not just the analogy that I went through where it logs into a bank account, but it also validates that you've already had a job for a certain period of time, or maybe you have an education of a period of time. And I know I'm not answering your question directly, but the real value is the ability to get credit, not the ability to purchase a home, but that's also how money is created. So the banking systems today basically are driven based upon people purchasing. The United States of America today is a strong country because it is a consumption based country. So it's creating wealth and value based upon people actually purchasing homes. And so what if other parts of the world could actually do something similar? But you also have to realize that in 2008, that's also why there was such a large crash, because people started figuring out, hey, I can go and get this mortgage, but I don't provide enough value in society that I make enough money that I can actually pay that mortgage. And so when that continued to happen, and there's a lot more to it than that, but what I'm trying to articulate is the ability to find property, the ability to purchase property, the ability to actually title a property. And if you can even come into it right here, so services should be a mortgage. So imagine if you could actually, and for instance, in the United States, it's usually common, especially in Arizona. Let's say you get a mortgage for 500K. Okay, let's say your monthly payment is $2,100 a month. You know that you're always going to be paying $2,100 a month unless you refinance that and maybe you'll have a new payment. But what in other parts of the world, for instance, like in New Zealand, it's very different. They have this thing called OE, which is an overseas experience, or if people just want to take a vacation, or if people want, maybe they have a hospital issue, medical issue, they can actually defer their payments. So instead of it trickling on for, what is it, 360 payments, which is 30-year mortgage on average in the U.S., that's the term. Instead of it continuing, what they do is they can actually say, we're going to push a pause button on our mortgage, and we're going to then pick it up at the end. When you start calculating all the math, it doesn't always show you, the equity that you have and what you can pull out. And some people say, you know what, I'm just going to create a HELOC. So what's basically a home equity line of credit where you can pull out some of the value that's inside of that property. Because in America and most parts of the world, land or homes or any kind of real estate is actually going to appreciate. So in a market where inflation runs rampant, you'll also be able to gain that value within those appreciating asset classes. And so people say, hey, I want to take some money out. But imagine if you're actually paying a mortgage and that mortgage is cryptographically backed by a title. And then every time you pay the mortgage, it basically drops down your payment. So let's say here's an example. So let's say that you have a certain amount of equity and you make a payment. Well, it drops down the, the amount that you owe. But let's also say that you wanted to sell it to somebody else. So let's say, for instance, I don't know if you've ever heard of a reverse mortgage, but let's say that you're getting to the point where you're 90 years old and you want to actually start selling the value of your home. Let's say you bought your home. Let's be really conservative here. Let's say you bought your home for $100,000. You paid it all the way off, and it currently is worth $1 million. So you've got $900,000 in equity, and you're 90 years old. So the ability for you to enjoy that home for the next 10 years is important. Let's say that you're projecting that you're gonna take your last breath at 100 years old. Well, why not pull out some of that 900,000 and start? Some people would say, "Hey, I want to do reverse mortgage," and let's say I get to 105 years old. Do I have to leave my home at 100? And so the point being is you can actually have third parties that instead of, for instance, some of us, depending on what part of the world you're in, you can actually invest into certain types of equities or investments that may have a group of investments into other investments. So they try and diversify risk based upon doing something like that. They would call them mutual funds or others. But those mutual funds may be investing into mortgages. But you as an individual can invest into mortgages. Let's say like it's a there's different types of investment vehicles, and they have taxation that ties to them in certain other ways as well. But let's say that you actually see what's happening within the housing market, and you want to actually purchase into someone else's ecosystem. Of You have to have two things to answer your question. You have to have the ability to pay your mortgage in a digital asset, and they have to have the ability to receive your payment in a digital asset. Then it's a matter of how that digital asset's actually managed and who owns it. And so really the goal is to have the future systems be able to identify this type of thing. And I can tell you, we've talked with the exclusive credit automation service provider in the United States, which is tied exclusively through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We're already in the file that I wanted to pull up is actually one that ties all that together. And I wish, let me see if I can look in one other place. So basically, there's a credit ecosystem. Ah, here we go. Finally. I may not be able to log in on this browser. So this is an example of it saying, let's go back here. Yeah, so let's say that this pops up an interface and says, "Hey, I want to actually get a mortgage, or I want to get a car." It says, "How much do you need?" Um, that's going to calculate that based upon who you are. So you say, "Hey, I bank with Citi or Bank of America." It basically finds the bank. You put in your username and password. It actually goes through and it sees a history of payments. So maybe you have 10 years or 10 payments or whatever, goes through, finds the different accounts, it knows different parts and pieces of you as an individual, and then it can actually tie or give you a dollar amount that you can qualify for. It's going to validate and tie the personal information together, because it's issuing you credit. And then now you need to understand, we don't. That's the piece we're trying to actually add value with. So you basically, it can show you history, show you your income, show you any kind of you know existing mortgage, etc. And then it can also pop up all additional options that tie to it, and it can be tied to particular banks. So let's say Capital One says, "Hey, you can get 600 grand. Here's your monthly payment." Well, Bank of America says, "You know what? Your interest rate's actually going to be lower. Instead of 4.10%, it's 3.25%, and instead of 600,000, it's actually 650." So you can say, "I want it." Validate who you are. Welcome, welcome. Comes in and actually does the paperwork. It's literally automating the whole process. This is an example of how you would start out. So it says, "Hey, I want to consolidate debt, or I want a home or a car." And that's basically the process that you see. And again, credit is very important when we're talking about the new financial system. And what I mean by the new financial system is that's how they're going to get people to start adopting it. Is they're just going to start literally issuing credit. And when people start getting issued credit, what's going to happen to the value of assets around you? And I'm going to specifically say like a tube of toothpaste or a dozen eggs or consumables. I'm not talking about a home, because what it's going to do with homes is drive the price up in a massive value. But I hope this is answering your question. You start seeing a real future and some depth to things that we may have not discussed. This is not something that we've gone through historically on, and probably can expose more. But do know that there is an element within the digital world around mortgages, and there's three or four different things that tie to it. One is around how the title is kept. One is around how the payments are made. One is around how the ability to issue credit is derived, and the other one is around how you actually would find these different assets. So, for instance, imagine if you could do a search based upon properties that would actually have a digital mortgage option tied to it. So, or let's say that someone wants to sell a home, and maybe they want to carry a note on it and they're willing to cryptographically sell it. And based upon your credit worthiness, which could also be obfuscated. So it's really, people have to opt into the system. And that's, the system has to be mature enough to be worthy of opting into. So it goes back to Daniela's question: is what can we all do? It's to participate and add value. It's like, just start using the system, please. Someone like yourself is saying, "Well, great, I want to use it, but I actually want to get a mortgage with it, and then maybe I want to do it in such a way where I want to pass that mortgage on to next generation." So that house, let's use a different analogy. Let's say the house is worth 1 million, but instead of only owing 100,000, you took out a second mortgage, and now you own 500,000. So you basically have 500,000 in liability, but you also have a home that's worth 1 million. So the ability for, within the digital world, to be able to pass the equity of 500,000 to the next generation, and the next generation knowing, how do we actually pay these bills? How can we sell it? How can we pull equity out of it? How does the value transfer? all of these things can actually be set up, but it's got to be accepted by the different mortgage institutions, the title companies. But we do see a future where that is realized. As a matter of fact, we've talked with some of the largest in the world, and I'd say when we talked with them, they're very interested, but it's still very early. So there's not a mortgage option that's technically available for the mass market. But I believe that once this type of technology can be deployed, for instance, to get a mortgage today, I don't know if you remember all the hoops and things that you had to jump through, but there's a lot. Bank statements for a period of time, taxes for a period of time, any other things they want you to jump through. Maybe it's insurance, and so you go through all these steps, and digitally it's all there. And with the ability to log into some of the systems, for instance, you log into the mortgage company system, or you log into, which are all different, by the way. But technology with logins that has data can actually get to a point where simplicity for the user can be realized. And some people are like, we want the user to absolutely prove this and this and this and this. But I promise you, people like yourselves, there will be, for instance, if you had the ability to go onto a multiple listing service and say, I want only homes that I could purchase based upon using a digital mortgage. And you know that all it is a username and password that you're going to need to put in. I promise you that there's a massive market out there that says we want to buy this way. So we'll actually search homes that are tied to a digital mortgage and digital credit process and the underwriting is all automated. Now, it may come back and say, hey, this bank account's way too new. You don't have enough history. So, but I can tell you, we're working with some of the biggest and best partners that are in the ecosystem that made this a very solid reality. Again, $4 trillion last year in mortgages went through this same system, the same algorithm and same system. So I'll stop blabbing there. Hopefully I answer your question. If not, feel free to expound upon it and I can dig in further. But okay, super duper question. I'm going to pull up an example. Yeah. Yep. So this is actually what I'm showing you here is a workflow process. Yeah. A workflow process with an organization, and I won't make certain claims here, but imagine the ability for a certain title company to be able to follow a process or even services within it. Because some of them are like, um, if a home is worth XYZ on Airbnb, we'll loan out F or D or G. I'm just being generic. But imagine title companies working through a process of onboarding um, basically the title structure. So I think we actually have, if I remember right, already gone live with some of this. Maybe we didn't. There actually is a title page and notary processes that tie to it. So I can't, as of today, we do not have digital notaries that are recognized within title companies. But we're starting to see closings happening online. Um, and notary processes being legally recognized. And so once that's done, then the title process will basically follow. And land management is another one of those things that if a digital world was able to deploy, a title or let's say a land survey within this jurisdiction and then have disputes that, let's say someone says, you know what, that boundary of that land is not accurate. It's 15 feet this way. Um, what you end up with in effect is the ability for title companies to actually have disputes that are cryptographically. When I say cryptographically, they're basically identifying and time stamping that it actually occurred. Because right now, most title companies are getting land registry management from the county. The county databases can go down, they can be corrupt, they can be inaccurate, but the goal is to be able to get these different counties to actually run these systems and in a decentralized fashion. So you literally need government adoption, and that's why what we're doing within these different ecosystems. So when we're talking about something crazy like this, the really beautiful part of it is it's creating an example of how a jurisdiction, a location, a building can actually have title, payment, ownership, transactions, and time value of money all basically linked into it. And then you have countries that recognize it country to country or region to region. And that's, in the United States of America, it's really hard to be able to penetrate that because they're so entrenched. But in other developing parts of the world, I can tell you Saudi Arabia and two other countries, which I will not mention in that part of the world, came to us and actually asked us specifically many years ago to create a process around purchasing, managing, and actually financing, and then cryptographically securing the financing behind it. So you can also say, hey, we want to, for instance, if you remember the 2008 financial crash, that was because people weren't able to pay bills, but really it was because the people behind the mortgages were selling the mortgages to other people, and insurance companies basically went defunct because people weren't actually looking at the numbers correctly. They weren't seeing that people could actually purchase and pay for that property from a cash flow standpoint. And so it's just a ripple effect, it's a chain event. But if you can actually see that this thing is actually funded, paying it, and cash flowing, and you can take those mortgages, but you have to have some strong economies. And one of the things that ties to it is war changes everything. These famines, these pestilence, this destruction that's whether natural or not. Some people see nuclear testing as earthquakes. Some people see, I know that right now, and I personally don't know the details, but these fires that are just unanimously starting in certain parts of the world, there's a reason why certain people have the authority to say, hey, this is a disaster, or this is not a disaster, and then you get federal relief funds, and where do those funds come from? Why is that actually happening? And I'm not saying that burning things down and getting funds are um, commonplace. What I am saying is where there's mystery, there's margin. Where there's confusion, it creates some opportunity. And that's why for so many years, especially, I mean, I'm an American, and I would say that America actually was involved in starting many wars or conflicts primarily because of control, whether that's of a dollar, whether that's of a port, or whether that's of just an ecosystem. So it's sad, but it's very true. And it's sad because life is so valuable, but a lot of people make the choice to create conflict and not to love one another, and over greed, over control. And it's really sad that that's a part of life. But I won't dig into that or spend more time on that. Hopefully, I've in a roundabout way answered your question. A lot of the stuff that we can talk about is just going to be found on this digital world site, and we'll continue to mature it. There is actually a title element to things, but We don't have any service providers. The one that I showed you before, there was a process that was being built. Some of the ones that we have from the title companies, they have offices in all 50 states, or at least like 46 states out of all 50, and they offer title services throughout the United States. And that's one of the ways we're doing it. But it's not a focus right now. The focus right now is literally the adoption of the systems within certain regions, and these regions don't have the systems that you're asking about, or at least they're not mature. The ability to get financing, they have land, they're building homes, but the ability to actually finance them, um, there may be credit infrastructure that is weak. So, and a lot of that is because, let's say, the IMF or World Bank or other ecosystems basically have created an ecosystem where foreign exchange rates into these countries is not favorable. Foreign exchange rates is a massive part of the financial system, but how are they managed? Who controls it? Oh, some people would say, hey, the interest rates based upon credit within a certain country to purchase a home, that has a massive role in what foreign exchange rates are. So if the interest rates go up, the foreign exchange rates go down. Some people would argue that's just how the economy works. And in the most part, they would be true. But if you limit the ability of organizations or entities that can actually purchase those, that is the difference. And you got to really understand that. So I'll try and be more specific. So let's say in Fiji, the foreign exchange rate is 62 cents, or I won't even be specific. Let's just say that in a particular country, the exchange rate doesn't make sense. Like, I remember living in New Zealand for a couple of years, and New Zealand as a country didn't want the exchange rate to move around very much. They didn't want a strong dollar, if you will, because they understood the buying and selling power of it. And what most people don't understand is there's countries, namely like China, that will actually have a foreign exchange rate internal to the country for citizens that use, and a foreign exchange rate that's external to the country that people that may want to manufacture something and are buying components and injecting funds into the market that they would use. So you really have to dig into foreign exchange rates that then tie into mortgage interest rates that then tie into treasury bonds. And then that's how foreign exchange stuff actually gets created. Technically, not in that order, but treasury bonds are usually adjusted, or the LIBOR is adjusted, that then hits interest rates. And the LIBOR is just London's analogy of their in Europe's interest rates that then affect US interest rates that then affect, or I should say treasury bills that then affect interest rates that then affect foreign exchange. It's all tied together. And remember, we talked about those who create the money create the rules. And that's really what we're talking about here is, where did the money come from? If we look at the history, going back to 1450, Portugal was actually the standard currency in the banking system. Then it was Spain for 110 years, then the Netherlands for 80 years, France for 95 years, Britain for 105 years, the United States for 105 years. If, let's say, the 2025, it shifts out. Question is, where could that go? And many people would absolutely believe that over the last 80 to 90 years, China has been a major player when it comes to the future of finance. They're already controlling a massive part. For 40 years, they purchased gold and they're backing their renminbi digital currency, so the digital version of renminbi, with gold and precious metals and many other things. And the rest of the world's just, they don't understand it, they don't see it. But what if there could be a different alternative? And I'm not going to be specific. If you're paying attention, you're seeing certain slides, you're seeing it, you're understanding it. But just know that we're working hard to help create an ecosystem. And some people would say, hey, you know, KSA or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a new country, and they're actually a country that doesn't do things that the rest of the world may agree with, or they may be involved in things that are just wrong. And I would argue that the country versus individuals, that individually act may be two different things. And I would also, I'll be the first one to admit that, and I will, actually, I can't even go there. So hopefully today's dialogue has provided some value in those that are listening to it live. We appreciate the support, the prayers, the updates, um, and we hope to have continued updates here in the near future. And grateful for the opportunity on so many levels. Life is beautiful, and grateful for your time. We'll plan on seeing you next week, which will be the 20th of June, same time. And if people have questions, you can go to rippleeffect.clear.events, or you can go to townhall.clear.events. So we'll go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see you next week. Much love, everybody. Bye-bye.